Awesome. So we're covering endorsements. And on our previous call, part one, we covered specifically the intro level, the basics, the fundamentals that you guys need to know in order to really understand how this stuff works. And it's just like anything else. I can't really show you how to ride a bike. I can't tell you how to ride a bike. And I can give you all the videos on how to ride it, but if you don't get in and sit on the bike or get on and sit on the bike and actually experience it yourself, you're not really going to learn anything, right? You're just going to have an idea of how it works. And so my objective here is to give you guys all the tools and everything you need in order to successfully handle this and understand what it really means. And so I've broken it down as much as possible and I've stuck to the instructions, right? And I told you this, guys, in the last call that as I revisited our bill remittance, 1.0 in the past where we covered all of the basics of remittance and we went over examples of where it worked, where it didn't work. And I realized that a lot of that stuff was happening from many individuals' perspectives, individuals that had success with it. And those examples were executed a little bit different from what I had been reading from the guideline. And so I told you guys I'm going to come back to it and I'm going to revisit the exact tick for tack guideline. Like, what does UCC, CFR, what does the USC say, right? What do those laws say? And so that's what I'm breaking down, tick for tack, right? I'm not adding anything from someone else's perspective. This is just from the source. All of this is from the source. And so if anyone's wondering, it's all laid out in 31 CFR and in the UCC3 laws, right? And so all of that stuff is where you can reference the information. And all I'm doing is simplifying it, breaking it down, and providing some real-time examples of what that can look like so it could paint a different picture. Because this legalese stuff is not easy, and I certainly don't enjoy reading it, but it's necessary. And so what we're covering is basically the difference between the signature and the endorsement because there are differences, right? There's a lot of differences and individuals don't quite understand it. And so the difference between a signature and an endorsement is using Cornell law and Black's dictionary law, right? We're going to break them both down so you guys can have a better understanding on what those are. So according to Cornell law, the signature is a person's name or mark written by the person or at their direction, signifies intent to authenticate or validate a document. It serves as proof of identity and agreement to terms in the document. And so it's your sign of nature, right? Your signature. In the definition of Black's Law Dictionary, it's any mark or name written with intent of authenticating a document. And it may be handwritten, printed, or made electronically, as long as it reflects the signatures or the signer's consent and approval of contents in the document, right? And so these two definitions are similar because the intent here is to basically prove your authenticity. So only you have that signature, right? Because if you really think about it in hindsight, it's the only thing that you ever created that wasn't given to you. I mean, your birth certificate was given to you, your name was given to you, your signature is yours. Like nobody gave that to you. And so it's a sign of authentication, right? And it's the only thing you got to authenticate you, right? But that's your signature. And when you put your signature on documents such as agreements, contracts, then you're agreeing to the terms and you're binding yourself to the terms of the agreement. An endorsement is a little bit different, right? An endorsement is the act of a payee, drawee, or holder signing the back of an instrument, such as a check or promissory note, thereby transferring the rights of ownership of the instrument to another party. So endorsements are common on checks. I mean, if you've ever written out a check, you clearly see that it says pay to the order of, which is instructing you to pay and transfer it to someone else. You're transferring that ownership. So that's the endorsement versus a signature. And so when you sign something, you're agreeing to do something. So when you sign a check, you're agreeing to pay with your signature. It's your agreement, right? And then on the back, the endorsement is what allows the transfer of it to the other person. So there are several types of endorsements, such as blank endorsements, restrictives, and special endorsements. And we'll cover that stuff later on, but this is just the intro to endorsements and signatures, right? There's a difference between both. An endorsement transfers ownership or rights of a negotiable instrument and affirms its validity and guarantees payment to future holders. So signing the back of a check transfers it to another person to deposit, and endorsing a promissory note to another party. So its key functions is one's authenticating and the other one's a transfer of ownership. Right? A signature usually appears on the document, typically placed at the end to signify completion, while the endorsement goes on the back of a negotiable instrument, right? So this is the difference between those. And when it comes to the intent of each of these, signature shows consent, agreement, and acknowledgement, while the endorsement transfers the rights or ownership and may involve the commitment to fulfill a financial obligation, right? So there's a big difference there. One gets you into the agreement, one shows consent, and the other one is to transfer rights, ownership, or financial obligations. So that's basically those two in a nutshell. And then we're going to break down a little bit more off that, right? This is going to stem off of that, and it covers assignment, negotiation, and commercial paper. And so ideally, when you're talking about assignment, right, this stems off of how you transform a negotiable instrument, right? How you endorse it. And so sometimes a check or a promissory note doesn't follow all of the rules, the legal rules to be considered negotiable. Basically, it's not easy to treat like cash, right? So in those cases, it can't be transferred the usual way. Instead, it must be assigned. Assignment means you give your rights in the contract, like the right to be paid, to someone else. You're saying, here, this is now your responsibility. And so this is common, guys. Like, I mean, for a lot of us in the credit space, right? We see this happening with creditors and debt collectors. So you have these agreements and you don't fulfill the obligation in the agreement. The creditor basically assigns it, and they do that through a bill of sale. And so they assign it to the next person, which is the debt collector. And then the debt collector comes at you and they start harassing you. And so that's what this assignment means, right? And it's happening in the corporation level where they're transferring one debt to another. So this happens when someone gives the paper to another person without signing it, or if the paper doesn't meet legal negotiability requirements. So a new person called assignee gets only whatever rights the last person had. And so this is where, when we talk about the transfer of debts, right, and we're talking about transferring a debt from one person to the next, those agreements is still binding you to them. And so even if they assign it to someone else, the assignee, right, the new person, they still have to follow what's in the agreement. So if the agreement states something such as these issues or any disputes shall only be settled in arbitration, then that means that whoever is the assignee can't go to court. Everything has to be settled in arbitration because that's what the agreement has. And so because all of those rights were transferred, that's what's happening. So if the original person had problems, let's say they refused to pay, the new person has the same problem. And that's what debt collectors have. They face that. And so this happens automatically. If someone dies or goes bankrupt, then whoever manages their stuff like a lawyer or executor gets the rights. And so that's assignment. Now, when we talk about negotiation, negotiation means transferring a check or note in a way that the new person becomes a holder and the one legally allowed to be paid. So to be the holder, you must have the paper and it must be made out to you, the bearer, right? Payable to bearer, which means anyone holding it. And so it's when you think about this in the form of negotiation and it's payable to bearer, it's basically a blank endorsement, right? And we'll go over that a little bit later. XYZ supplier writes the check to Mary Jones, right? Mary signs the back of the check and gives it to the cashier at the supermarket to buy groceries. She endorsed the back, right? She endorsed it and signed it and delivered it. Now the supermarket becomes the holder. That's negotiation. So it's a negotiable instrument, right? And so that's to simplify that, break that down. It's the best example I can give is someone handing a check over to a grocery store. They become the holder, right? Now it's negotiable. It became negotiable in exchange. And so when we're dealing with order paper versus bearer paper, there's some similarities here when it comes to the types of endorsements. But also, I cover this because it's important you guys know the terminology. Because how you speak about it and how you're implementing it, they all mean different things, but they're similar in their own way. So if a check says pay to the order of someone, it's called order paper. To pass it on, the person must sign it and hand it over. Right? So this is basically the type of endorsement that restricts it, right? It's very specific as to who it's handed over to. It's special. It's a special endorsement. Where if the check says pay to bearer or pay to cash, it's called bearer paper, where it can be passed just handing it over, right? No signature needed. So that's a blank endorsement. The difference between the both is one, if one gets lost, which is the pay to the order of, right? Once it's named as to who's paid to, if it gets lost, someone can't claim it unless it's that person, right? Unless it's that named individual, no one can claim it. But when it comes to the bearer paper, because it's a blank endorsement and there's no signature needed, if it gets lost, then anyone can claim it, right? Because it's blank. So if you order paper and sign it without writing a name, it becomes a bearer paper, which anyone can cash it if they find it, right? And so I'm breaking it down like this and including the other definitions because I've read all this stuff, right? And so for it to make sense, like it sounds like these are all different. They're not, one is technically special endorsement, which it is, and the other one is a blank. And so when we go read that definition, you're going to see the differences. And so risk of bearer paper, right? And so when you have a blank endorsement, which is bearer paper, says Susan Smith writes a check, says pay to cash, and gives it to John Doe. That's bearer paper. And John puts the check in his wallet. It gets stolen. The thief is now in possession. But because John didn't voluntarily give it to the thief, negotiation hasn't happened yet. But if the thief gives the check to an innocent third party, someone who doesn't know it's stolen, that person can legally cash it, right? And John will lose money because there was no signature. It's a blank endorsement, right? It's an open book. And so Susan can, because she was the original writer of the check, right? She can still try to get her money back, but only if it can be found. Only if the thief can be found, right? But we all know that once something's lost, it's lost. So in this case, it's lost, right? Endorsements. An endorsement is when you sign the check on a commercial paper and pass it on to someone else. So it shows a transfer of ownership, it's handwritten, typed, stamped. Usually it's written on the back, but it doesn't have to be. Because when you guys like read a contract, when you ever sign a mortgage contract, I know a lot of homeowners can relate to this, right? That endorsement is on the front. It's on the paper and it's on the page of the agreement. So it doesn't always have to be on the back, but typically it's on the back. And so once the check is negotiable, the type of endorsement is used doesn't change that. It affects how the check can be passed on next, right? And so it doesn't actually affect the check. It only affects how it can be passed on, right? Paid to the order of. That's typically how it works. And so here's an example of a blank endorsement, right? And so with a blank endorsement, you just sign your name. It becomes bearer paper, right? You just sign your name, it becomes bearer paper, meaning that anyone can cash in. So you sign your name and it's not actually you're not actually making it out to anyone specific. And so anyone can go and fill it out themselves if they find it, if it fell, and claim it, all right? Because it's bearer paper, it's a blank endorsement. And so if your name is spelt wrong on a check, you could sign it the wrong way, the right way, or both, right? And so ideally that's something you could fix, but what I'm explaining here, guys, is the blank endorsement is an open checkbook. And so you want to be careful when you have things like blank endorsements, especially if you're writing out checks, because anyone can claim it. But if it was a special endorsement, it's paid out to a very specific person, right? Paid to the order of, and then the person's name, and then sign it. Now, only that person can cash it. So that's why a special endorsement is a little more constricted, right? It protects the instrument. The restrictive endorsement is a little bit different, where you limit what the next person can do with the check. And so you can instruct them and say it's for deposit only, for collection, pay any bank, right? Which means that it must either go into your bank account, or it means that it's meant to be collected by the bank, or for bank use only. And so a restrictive endorsement simply restricts what that next person can do with the instrument. The conditional endorsement, you can add a condition. So pay blank, Joe, Mark, if this thing happens. And so if the person can't cash it unless the condition is met. And so, when I went over this, I thought about this, and it's similar to like a irrevocable trust, right? Like basically you won't be able to claim anything in the trust until something happens, right? So that's a conditional endorsement. And until that has been met, right? And this is just like an example, guys, so that you guys can have an idea. Until that is met, until that condition is met, right? The conditions within the actual trust, then it remains as if, right? It's basically a type of restrictive endorsement. You're restricting what's there. Endorsements for deposit or collection. So used to put checks into the banking system, right? So if you write for deposit only, the bank puts the money into your account and no one else can cash it. And so this is what a lot of stores and businesses usually stamp on the checks that they receive. It's for deposit only because it's not going anywhere else. And so this is what the common businesses will use, right? Endorsements for deposit or collection. Qualified endorsements is that you write without recourse when signing, right? And typically you're writing a qualified endorsement on the back when you do a bill remittance, because you're going to have without recourse on the back, right? When you're endorsing it. So this means you're not responsible if the check bounces or something goes wrong later. However, you're still responsible for having the right to transfer it, making sure all signatures are real. The check hasn't been changed, right? It hasn't been altered. And this is all falls in line with the requirements in CFR, right? 31 CFR, and then in the endorsement instructions. You don't know of any reason someone shouldn't be paid, and you don't know if the person who wrote it is bankrupt, right? And so without recourse limits, but doesn't completely remove your responsibility, right? And so it limits your responsibility, but doesn't completely remove it. So it's important to know, right? Because that's what without recourse means. So when you're writing it in the back, you understand what you're putting on paper. Because a lot of people just want to, oh yeah, I want to endorse my bills, and they're writing all these things and they're endorsing it, but they don't even understand what any of this stuff means. And so this is why we're breaking it down. A general endorsement is a normal endorsement without restrictions, right? You promise that you have the right to transfer it. It hasn't been altered. You don't know if any problems or fraud. All the signatures are legit, right? And that's a general endorsement. Then you have what's called checks marked paid in full. And so there's two ways to look at this. Sometimes someone sends a check and writes paid in full on it, but they still owe you more money. And if there's no disagreement about the money and they owe more, you can still cash the check and ask for the rest. But if there's a real dispute and they say that you delivered the wrong product or late or didn't agree with the price, and they send a check marked as paid in full, cashing it could mean that you accept the payment as full. And so that's also considered accord and satisfaction, right? And what you should do in this case is if you don't agree, and it's safer to just send the check back and ask for the full amount, or stamp it with something like this check is accepted without giving up any of the legal rights. And it's a suggestion, but I recommend just sending it back, right? It's easier. You didn't accept it, you didn't cash it, and so you request the full payment, and the agreement still follows. And so you want to be careful with checks marked paid in full, especially if you didn't know there was a dispute. Depositing them might mean you legally agree to settle for less. All right. And so that covers assignment and negotiation of commercial papers. So that's a very general basic. Now, when we talk about administering negotiable instruments, so this part I'm not going to cover because I did this because once you've gone through all this material, you now have the general basic knowledge that you need, right? You want to go through, I recommend 3, 4 times, 5 times. I'd recommend 10 times to really master it. And then go through these steps, right? Create your trust. You want a revocable living trust through Rocket Lawyer, and I give you guys a step-by-steps. Apply for your EIN for the trust, open up the business bank account or the trust bank account. And I just cover all this and then really start mastering everything, right? This is all the foundational stuff. All the foundational stuff. And so these are a step-by-step checklist on what you guys need to do, because if you don't go through this and you're having trouble, you don't understand anything, it's because you're skipping steps and you're rushing everything. And that's why. Right? And obviously you have the certificate of trust here. Once you create it, you can leverage this, guys. It's a template. You can make it your own. I'm just providing you guys with the tools that I've used, right? All right, so we're going to get into monthly statements and coupons. So really understanding what they are, how they work, right? And really what all of them mean, because I've had a lot of questions in the past. Individuals, like, hey, how you work this? What am I supposed to put here? I'm like, that's because you don't understand the basics. And two, all bonds and coupons are different. I mean, I've seen bonds come from banks such as Navy Federal, and the coupons at the top of the page. I know that's common with things such as medical bills. Those coupons are at the top of the page, and others are on the bottom of the page. And so you don't understand what any of them are, you don't understand the differences between the paper. And so you don't understand what the security means and how it all works. So that's the purpose. This is the reason why we're going over this. So you can understand that we're breaking down what all of it means. And so most people think of their monthly bills and those payment slips that come in called payment coupons as just a reminder to pay what is owed. But there's more going on behind the scene. These papers are part of a bigger financial system and they're more involved than you might think. And so these bills are more like bonds, right? And so when you think about this stuff, if you would really slow down and ask yourself, you know, when have I ever received a check that had a positive number that I couldn't deposit in my bank account? Right? Most people receive positive checks, right? I'd like to think all individuals receive positive checks when they're paid out or somebody is paying them via check, etc. It's a positive number. And so when you look at your actual security instrument, your bond, your bill statement, it's a positive number, meaning there's value in it. So that's just one sign that is obvious. That's telling you that there's money in that piece of paper. Now, the question is what to do with it, right? In order to understand that, you got to understand what all this stuff means. So these bills are more like bonds. So you might not realize it, but when you get a monthly statement or coupon, it's not just a bill, it's actually a financial document, like a bond that's connected to your name. You're not just a customer, you're actually an investor in this deal. When you sign up for something like credit card or loans, your application becomes a financial tool the company uses. That statement or coupon that you get, it's a security, a financial statement that has value and is registered in your name. So a lot of these securities get processed through something like a central banking system, which helps manage and track money flow between banks and companies. So every time you get a monthly bill, it's just a reminder. It's a document proving the financial connection between you and that company. And when we discuss about connection between you and that company, what are a couple of things that keep come in mind, right? To me, the only thing I could really think of is the agreement. And so what do we know about the agreement? What I know is nobody reads the agreement. And so that's why they don't understand the financial connection between them and the company. Because they're missing the knowledge that they need to understand it's in their agreement. Your agreement even tells you if the company that you went into an agreement with accepts these things as a form of payment. Because not every company does, guys. It's not included in all of their agreements. And so what's in the agreement is what you're bonded to and they're bonded to. And so in order to follow this process and enforce it, you need to understand whether it is enforceable through the agreement. So the first thing you got to do is read the agreement. What these statements actually do, right? Let's break down a statement and payment coupon really mean. A coupon shows you that you owe something. It's connected to a company's own financial paperwork called an indenture, which is in their internal record, right? And so in the previous campus, I was covering a lot about the indenture trustee, right? And what that really means is the indenture typically is where they'd have to file everything, right? Is they're basically filing with the SEC. And when they file this stuff with the SEC, I showed you guys how to identify that, right? you want to search up the 10K or the 8K in order to determine if they have any filing for that. And if you can't find it, right? If you can't find that information online, and that's because they're not registered to handle securities, because that's what it means. When they're filed with the SEC, they're registered to handle securities. But when they're not, you can't perform this with them. A statement is kind of like saying, here's your money in the form of a bond we created under your name. But here's a catch. Instead of explaining that you could do something else with it, the companies expect you to just send money back as a gift. So that's what everyone normally does, is just pay gifts. Then they use it to their benefit, like collecting money or using it to support their own finances. All of this is tracked using your information, which the company keeps so that they can manage your bond and payments. And so you have rights over these documents because the bond or coupon is in your name. You're technically the owner of it. And that means that you have the say on what happens with it. To stay in control, you must give the company clear written instructions about what you want done with the bond or coupon. The bond cannot be given to someone else, transferred, unless you sign the back of it. That's called the endorsement. So if you don't sign the back of it, it's not considered an endorsement and it can't be transferred. So if you don't say anything or don't give instructions, the company will assume that you're giving it back to them and they'll claim ownership and benefit from it. So you don't tell them what to do with the bond. If you don't tell them what to do with the bond, they'll just keep it and treat it like it's theirs. And at that point, back to the basics that I'm sharing with you in assignment versus negotiation of commercial paper, you have those blank endorsements, right? And so technically it's almost like it's lost. And so you guys are understanding where all this is interconnected. You're technically leaving a blank check. Anyone can claim it. The rules you have to follow so they can't take it is the legal rules that you need to follow is if you want to redeem or use these bonds the right way. And these rules are under these following sections. Title 31, right? CFR sections 328.5 and 328.8. Now, these laws explain exactly how to endorse and sign the documents. If you don't follow these rules, your documents won't be accepted, and you lose your rights to claim money. Rules about endorsements include where to sign, where the signature goes. It must be clear and readable, and it must be permanent, not easy to erase. So you won't be using pencil, right? I recommend using, a blue pen, which is different from the black ink, right? Because a lot of them use black ink on their statements. I think blue pen would make the most sense. Well, I haven't seen anything on there. A lot of people have questions about whether it matters. I don't know. I haven't seen any laws. You guys can do your own research on that. I'm just using my common sense on, if I want to differentiate my signature and my writing, I'll use a different color pen versus what's on the paper. Right? And if you mess this up, it's like the bond doesn't count anymore. And so what you have to do is start over, right? Handle your affairs as is. And guys, just because you can do this doesn't mean stop handling your obligations. You're in an agreement, right? You're in an agreement. You agreed to fulfill your promise to pay, because that's what all the agreements say in legal terms. Fulfill your promise to pay, right? That's what it means. So your promise to pay could be in the form of endorsement or in the form of Federal Reserve notes. You hand over your Federal Reserve notes. But you're fulfilling your obligation to pay. So you can't ignore that because you have an agreement with them and you agree to do that. So just because they attempt to potentially, let's say, refuse it, or it doesn't go as planned, doesn't mean you stop your obligation, right? You have an agreement, follow through. You can still run this process while maintaining the terms of the agreement and seeking remedy, right? You can still do that, but don't give them a reason to kick back at you. Why endorsement signing is a big deal, right? Endorsement means that you sign a financial document to show what should happen to it. According to law called Uniform Commercial Code, a signature counts as an endorsement when it does things like letting someone else cash it and use it in negotiating, telling the company who can and can't use it, which is restricting, taking legal responsibility, like saying, I'll pay for this. I'll pay if this does not go through. If your signature is unclear, the law usually treats it as an endorsement anyway, unless you're clear about what you say. Why this matters. So if you don't write clear instructions, the company may treat your signature like a blank check and say you gave the bond to them. So that's what the endorsing is. You're instructing them on the actual security. But when you don't instruct them, you leave it open. So when you don't give instructions, it's like leaving the door open for the company to take it, right? And so today's paperless billing makes it even harder to notice because you don't see the physical coupon or have to sign anything. And it's happening, and it happens online. And so this is why I recommend you guys opt out of everything. Anyone that's in electronic billing, you're just wasting your time. I mean, they do it for convenience so they can continue to take advantage. That's why they also offer perks, right? They'll give you, monthly discounts on your bill if you opt into paperless, right? Or you set up auto pay, they'll definitely give you a discount. And that's just an incentive to keep collecting the gifts conveniently, consistently, while you don't realize that you could do this. It's the types of endorsements and what they do. So depending on how you sign the document, you're deciding who gets to use it and how. You sign it, but give no instructions. Now it can be used by anyone holding it. Companies love this because it makes it easier for them to claim ownership and use it however they want. Restrictive endorsements. So you write something like pay to blank name only for deposit only. This protects your financial interests. No one else can use it, but it also limits what the company can do. So they don't profit as easily from it. Special endorsements. You can make something like pay to the company and then sign it and create a balanced deal. You redeem the value of the bond, you get something in return. The company gets a fair share. It keeps things fair and clear. Right? And so these are really the most common types of endorsements, but I pretty much covered everything you guys need to know about that part. Now we dive into the CFR, right? So the CFR part, 328, this breaks it down like you're learning how bearer securities work and how banks, the IRS, and even you might handle them properly under the law, right? And so what are bearer securities? right? Bearer securities, remember what the word bearer is, right? When you think of bearer, I want you to think about blank endorsement because the bearer, remember, once you're called the bearer, you're the holder, all right? So if you're a holder at any point, you have now control because you're a holder. And so bearer securities are like gift cards or a movie ticket. So whoever holds it owns it. So no name is printed on it. And if I have a movie ticket and I hand it over to a friend, they can go and watch the movie. It doesn't have their name, it's not restricted to them. And if you're holding it, you can cash it, redeem it, exchange it. Now, a couple examples are treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds, right? And when you think of treasury notes, you're thinking of the dollar bill, the $1, $2, $3, right? If I got 10 US dollars in my pocket in ones, they're not restrictive, right? I can literally transfer them to anyone else because they're not restrictive. And when you think about bonds as well, right? Bonds are the same thing, but they're a different type. They're securities. And those are also transferable. So who handles these? The rules of 31 CFR Part 328 apply mainly to bearer securities are handled by banks. And so I want you guys to pay attention to this because you have to understand what the bank's responsibilities are, what your responsibilities are. Right? So 31 CFR Part 328 applies mainly when bearer securities are handled by banks, the IRS. And so we're talking about big national banks, savings associations, trust companies, usually when taxes are being paid, right? So we're talking about the IRS here. These rules don't apply if you're just giving the security to someone else privately, or if the security is already registered to someone else's name, not a bearer. So what are the rules for? So these rules are here to make sure bearer securities are used the right way, especially when the government is involved. So they cover redeeming security, like cashing a bond when it matures, exchanging old ones for new ones and upgrading the bonds, paying taxes, right? Like state taxes or when someone passes away, and turning a physical bond into a digital one, right? A book entry security. How the process works. So if a bank is involved, right, banks have to follow some of these rules. They can't just send security to the government. They must follow specific rules. And that's what I was covering in the CFR, right? And these rules outline as follows. You have to stamp the security on the left side using a special format. So this stamp makes the security non-tradable. No one else can use it, and it must be clear and readable. Can't cover important info like serial numbers, and you have to send the stamped security to the Federal Reserve Bank in their district. So delivery must be done securely using registered mail, messenger, or armored car, right? And this is what the CFR states, right? That's what the CFR states. If the IRS is involved, when bearer securities are used to pay taxes like income, gift, or estate taxes, the IRS stamps the bond to say this is being used to pay a blank tax owed by the person and address. This stamp locks the security for the tax purposes. And so this is what the IRS will be now taking to the Federal Reserve Bank, right? What happens after you stamp it? Here's what 31 CFR 328.7 and 8 say, once the security is stamped, it is frozen for that specific purpose. This means that they can't trade it, sell it, transfer it to anyone else, and can only be cashed out, redeemed, exchanged according to the stamp's instructions. So if you have a lost bearer security, right, you can apply for a replacement, but it's risky. According to 328.8, the Treasury may require the bond or insurance to cover the risk of the lost original showing up later, right? And so there's some documents for that. I believe I've been working on it. Lost and stolen or destroyed securities. I have some documents. There's some forms you'd fill out. Haven't finished that yet, but when that time comes, I got you guys. But all of this stuff has a process. So certain situations happen, there's solutions, there's ways you can go about it, and there's certain documents in place that you can follow. Again, this isn't coming from me. This is all from CFR. It's all from UCC. So here's what to do. The stamp must be about 4 inches wide and 1.5 inches high. Must be clear, readable, and not cover the serial number. Be stamped on the left side of the bond or note. Include the name of the Federal Reserve Bank it's being sent to. Match the exact wording depending on its purpose. Right? So here's what your stamp should say based on what you're using for the bond. So redeeming or exchanging the bond. So when we're talking about redeeming, this is the bills, right? For presentation to the Federal Bank of United States Treasury for redemption in exchange for securities of an issue in accordance with the written instructions by name of the presenting bank. And for paying estate taxes, the stamp reads as follows, and same thing for converting a digital book entry security, and then for IRS tax payments. So there's a specific stamp for each purpose. So you have to understand, right? So even if you're paying estate taxes, there's a specific stamp for paying estate taxes versus paying IRS tax payments. And so you have to understand the differences. Shipping the security, right? Now, typically speaking, you'll send it through registered mail, messenger, armored car services, or, you can send it through priority mail. I think either way works. I mean, we're definitely not doing armored car or messenger, right? And registered mail, it can get pricey. And so by using registered mail, you can save yourself some money by going priority. Remember, what I mean by Federal Reserve Bank based on your district, it's typically who you're sending it to, right? The bank you're sending it to is that institution. All right, there you want to basically, and we'll cover that next on what to do when sending them out. But ideally, you want to follow the instructions that are given to you, because there's no one place to send everything. You have to find it through them. And you have to use special language to figure it out. So what about coupons? Some bearer bonds come with coupons attached, and these are interest payments. Here's what to do depending on the coupon status. So the coupon has not matured yet. And so some of you probably wondering, what do you mean not matured yet? Matured means it hasn't gone over its date of redemption, right? And so it hasn't passed that. And so if it's gone past that, then it's now considered a matured coupon, and you have to process it a little bit different. You have to detach it. It's already matured. right? But if it's missing, then that's no good, right? You basically would have to cover for the face value, meaning at the end of the day, if you ever, it's like basically not receiving your billing statement. You got to cover it with Federal Reserve notes, right? It's not something to really overthink, but that's what that really means. But if it's a matured coupon, that's the only time to detach it. So you never in any circumstance are going to detach it if you just recently received this security, because the chances of it being matured is slim to none. I mean, they're sending it to you as reminders. That's what those are for. They're reminders. And so if you process it in timely fashion, you don't really run the risk of it maturing. So this is what the law says, right? And I'm not going to cover all the details of the law because it's here for you to read, but to simplify it, this covers how the bearer security must be endorsed and to be used for redemption, tax payment, exchange, and conversion. It's only for banks and IRS use, not for private people passing bonds to each other, right? And that's this specific law. This specific law covers who can use it, right? Only certain approved banks and financial institutions can use securities under these rules, and they must follow the federal law when endorsing and stamping and submitting bonds. Now, remember what I told you guys, that they have to be registered to handle securities. That's why not all banks and financial institutions can do this. And this why I tell you guys, if you have these statements coming in and your agreement doesn't actually state otherwise, that they accept things such as restrictive endorsements or conditional payments or remittance, if it doesn't use those specific words, or words that are related to that, it's likely that they don't accept. Right? You can also double check that and see if they're registered with the SEC. Because if they're not registered to handle securities. Types of stamps. The stamp must be in a very specific format and it must say exactly what the bond is being used for. And this avoids confusion and prevents payment fraud, right? And that's what restrictive does. The stamp placement. So this actually covers a stamp placement. So if you guys want to reference any of this stuff and revisit it, right? I also cite where all this stuff comes from. So it's not stuff I'm making up, guys. I got it right from Cornell. If you guys have questions or concerns. So the left side of this bond is where the stamp goes. It must be permanent. I'm not covering serial numbers and not to be erased or altered. All right, an improper endorsement. If this stamp is unclear, in the wrong place, missing required info, the bond may be rejected and not accepted for the included use. So you have to follow what it says because they're telling you what will be accepted and what won't be accepted. And now, let's say you follow all of these rules, you understand that you followed all the rules. This is why you guys need to really learn this stuff, is because if you truly know you did it correctly by following all of these instructions, there's no way you'll have issues enforcing this, right? There's absolutely no way. But if you don't understand this, you send it in and they don't accept it, and you're not 100% confident that you did it right, and that's something that you need to fix, right? You need to get back to the drawing board, start learning. So what happens after stamping? Once the bond is stamped, it can't be sold, traded, or transferred. It can only be used for specific things the stamp says. And again, that's where I got that information for lost bonds. If the bond is lost or stolen, you can request a replacement, but you'll probably have to provide a surety bond, proof of ownership, and extra paperwork. And that's what I was sharing with you earlier on what I was working on. There's some documents you can file when that happens, right? But that's, again, a later time. So why it all matters is because the bearer securities are like paper money with no name, and if you lose it, someone else can claim it. The stamp endorsements are used to lock the bond for specific legal use, and following this 31 CFR 328 helps banks and the IRS process these securely and legally, right? And so When we're talking about stamps, we're going to go over that on the next call. And you'll be quite surprised because, I was sharing with you what the other individuals were doing to process this. A lot of them were using stamps, but I have yet to find where it requires the stamp to negotiate, right? And so we're going to cover that in the next call. And if you ever hold the bearer bond or help someone who does, you're dealing with the banks or the IRS. This is how to make it official. It's with these specific instructions, right? These specific steps. And so on tomorrow's call, guys, we're going to cover stamps and negotiable instruments, and then we're going to go over into examples of restrictive endorsements and the stamps, right? We're going to cover all of that so that you guys can have a deeper understanding of what that looks like. And then following that call, we will cover where to send it, and I'll do a step-by-step example live video on how I would do it personally, right? So you guys can see it and I can share that with you. But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is leave it open for any questions you guys may have. What are your thoughts on what I went over? And did all of that make sense? Was there anything different I went over that, caught your attention and so forth? You guys can unmute.
I say it was
Yo,
great stuff. It was definitely great stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, it
And it was
broke
a
yeah.
it
lot of
down,
definitely
right?
new information. Yeah, you broke
Yeah,
it
it broke
down.
it
I
down, man.
feel
Because
like, yeah, I was gonna say that, like, really, really breaking down the difference between the two instruments and like just make it more understandable.
yeah,
Like, it make a whole lot more sense.
yeah, it's the most important part. I mean, the play is great, man. Like the ability to be able to do that and exchange instruments so that you can offset these bills, like that's a huge win.
What
But
you said,
imagine
yeah,
mastering this stuff, guys. Just master it. Like you only get
so,
one time to master it. Once you do it,
yeah,
everything makes sense. You know how to move when they're giving you a hard time. It's just like the credit stuff. What are we doing every
yeah,
week? We're basically staying up to par with information. I'm going over new methods. I'm going to new processes. I'm going over,
yeah,
the way different tactics work. But it's the same thing with this. Only difference is we got to really understand what all of it means from start to finish, right? Because where people get confused, they don't know where to go. They don't even know where to revisit. They don't even know where to like where they went wrong because they're doing something with absolutely no base, no foundation, and that's what leads to a lot of questions, a lot of doubt, and failure, right? And so that's really the whole purpose of us going back to from ground one to zero, from 0 to 10, because
yeah,
ultimately it's going to get to the point where you guys are going to be able to learn this stuff and teach it to other people. Like ultimately, I'm just going over the same exact laws. Like all that stuff I didn't add, I didn't get from Google, I didn't do any of that stuff. I got right from the laws itself and I just simplify. I just broke them down by definition, by sources. You see where I'm getting all that info. What I was sharing before was a little bit of everything, was from success stories, also examples. And then I was looking at all of it. I'm like, man, they just didn't follow everything to the T, right? They didn't go tick for tack or what it says. And that's what
yeah.
led to a lot of inconsistencies. And so that's something I ran into when I was having success and then I didn't. And then I'm like, all right, what's next? Because I didn't know what to do. I had no base. I'm I was literally going into it thinking like, damn, I figured something out. Oh man, it works. Let me do it again. And then you don't get the results and you don't know where to pivot. You don't have the foundation to make a
Yeah.
decision. You don't have the foundation to start doing honestly what I'd call process of elimination, right? I'm doing process of elimination, trying to determine where did I go wrong? Did I endorse it incorrectly? Did I put it in the wrong place? You know, you now you're checking the boxes, you're going back to the drawing board, and now you have a blueprint to follow.